Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we cut through the noise and give you the essential knowledge you need, straight from the source material. If you're looking to get quickly but thoroughly well-informed on a topic, often discovering knowledge you didn't even know you needed, then you are in exactly the right spot. Today, we are cracking open the playbook for, well, psychological and spiritual survival, written by one of the 18th century's most explosive voices, George Whitefield. We are analyzing excerpts from his legendary sermon, Satan's Devices. Our mission is to understand why this 300-year-old text remains such a fascinating piece of practical psychology. Whitefield created a systematic, tactical map for spiritual warfare based on one key verse, 2 Corinthians 2.01. That verse reads, "Lest Satan should get an advantage over us, for we are not ignorant of his devices." We need to map out these 6 core devices or tactics, understand the nature of the adversary as Whitefield defined it, and grasp why this structured knowledge was considered absolutely essential for his listeners to survive.
And that biblical context is actually the perfect place to start, because it immediately sets the stage for the sophistication of the adversary's work. The Apostle Paul wrote these words to the Corinthians regarding a very specific and dramatic situation, one that perfectly illustrates Whitefield's point about extremes.
Tell us about that. What was the original context for the warning, lest Satan should get an advantage?
Well, the initial problem was a moral scandal. It involved a man who had committed incest. He had taken his father's wife. And the Corinthian church had been entirely too lax, just neglecting their duty to discipline him. So Paul commanded them to excommunicate the offender, which they did. But here's where they ran into the second, much subtler fault.
So they successfully exercised discipline, but then they overcorrected.
Precisely. They went from neglecting discipline to administering it with far too much severity and resentment. The church just continued to ostracize him, running this massive risk that the now penitent offender would be swallowed up with overmuch sorrow, which could lead him to utter despair, maybe even suicide.
So Paul steps in and says, wait, you must now forgive him and confirm your love toward him, lest Satan should get an advantage over us.
Exactly. And Whitefield highlighted this entire episode to demonstrate his core premise. The adversary works not just through promoting evil or laxity, but crucially, he works through extremes. The danger is in the imbalance, both the original neglect and the subsequent excessive, unforgiving cruelty. This really establishes the pattern for the whole sermon. The devices are designed to push you to one extreme or the other.
Okay, let's unpack this and transition to Whitefield's definition of the adversary himself. He starts, logically, with the name, Satan. What's the fundamental nature of the enemy being described here?
So the word Satan, in its original signification, it simply meant an adversary or an accuser. Whitefield defines him as the chief of the devils, cast down for striving to be his god, and now permitted to, seek whom he may devour. He's given multiple titles in the source material, and they all reflect his character. The evil one, the prince of the power of the air, and the spirit that now ruleth in the children of disobedience.
And his historical motivation, what's driving him?
It's rooted in pure malice. He's an enemy to God and a hater of truth. Whitefield emphasizes this history, slandering God in paradise, famously telling Eve she shall not surely die, and even promising Jesus the kingdoms of the world in exchange for worship. His character is just fundamentally driven by malice, envy, and revenge against God's creation.
We've established that he has immense power, citing examples like, carrying Christ's body through the air or driving a herd of swine into the sea. But Whitefield is careful not to focus on that raw force. Why is that?
Because Whitefield wants his listeners to know where the real daily danger lies. He emphasizes that the adversary is most remarkable for his subtlety, his guile. Since he lacks the unlimited power to simply take us by brute force, he has to rely on opportunities, strategy, and deception to betray us.
So the sermon explicitly states that we are more in danger of being seduced by his policy than overborne by his sheer power. If he's relying on policy over power, what does that mean practically for you, the listener? Does Whitefield suggest this subtle approach is why so many people don't even realize they're being tempted?
Absolutely. Policy implies manipulation and timing. It means he isn't attacking the gate with battering rams. He's slipping through the cracks when you're distracted or vulnerable. And this shifts the focus entirely from, say, physical defense to mental and spiritual vigilance. It turns the fight into a long, intricate chess game played over the course of a lifetime rather than a single fist fight.
That brings up a necessary question. Why the constant battle? Why are we subjected to this continual warfare?
Whitefield justifies the constant experience of temptation by saying it is the common lot of all God's children. we're in a state of disorder, and this trial is universal. Angels were tempted, the first Adam was tempted, and even Jesus Christ, the second Adam, was put to trial. The promise, which Whitefield holds on to, is that we are not suffered to be tempted above what we are able to bear.
So if the battle is universal and it lasts all life, Whitefield singles out one period as the most dangerous timing for the attacks.
Yes. While temptation lasts all life because life is a continual warfare, the time of conversion, or first entering upon the spiritual life, is cited as the most critical time. This is when Satan most violently besets us.
Why then? I mean, if he waits until they are established, surely the fall would be greater.
You'd think so, but it's an economy of effort. If he can prevent the individual from ever setting out, he's secured them immediately. He hits them when they are weakest, most unsure of their footing, and least experienced in this internal battle. If he can create a single, dramatic, emotional failure right at the beginning, he leads them captive at his will.
And that leads us directly to the two major traps he sets for the new convert. These two extremes that correspond to the laxity and the excessive severity we saw in that Corinthian example. Let's start with the dark extreme. Device number 1. Driving the convert to despair.
So when God first awakens a sinner and they're convicted of their past actions, Whitefield says Satan strikes in immediately. He aggravates those convictions. He weaponizes their history. The goal is simple: to make the person feel their sin is too great, too numerous, or just too final to ever find mercy. He wants them to feel, with Cain, that my punishment is greater than I can bear.
That sounds incredibly modern, that psychological paralysis induced by overwhelming shame.
It is, and Whitefield's remedy is a radical psychological shift. He stresses that ruin comes not from the greatness or number of the sins, but entirely from impenitence and unbelief. The remedy is found in the power of forgiveness, where the merits of Christ are infinitely greater than any sin, making them white as snow.
Wait, isn't telling someone who has sinned much to love much almost a justification for moral recklessness? I mean, how does Whitefield balance that radical forgiveness with the necessary call for immediate change?
That's a great question, and the balance lies in understanding why the forgiveness is so effective. The instruction isn't that you can just keep sinning, it's that faith reframes the guilt. The insight Whitefield provides is that the depth of your past failing now becomes an opportunity for profound gratitude and renewed love. If you have sinned much, you shouldn't despair, but rather use the experience of being forgiven as fuel to love much. It converts that paralyzing guilt into motivating gratitude.
That's a really powerful distinction. Okay, now for the other side of the emotional coin, device number 2. Tempting converts to presume, which is spiritual pride. This seems to target the high of the new conversion experience.
Precisely. After a new convert has tasted the good word of life and felt that associated joy and illumination, Satan will immediately attempt to puff him up with a high conceit of his own attainments. They start setting aside their brethren as though they were holier than they.
This is the spiritual equivalent of posting about your personal growth online and looking down on everyone else's slow journey.
A perfect modern parallel. It's a form of spiritual flexing, really. And the consequence Whitefield warns of is severe. A haughty spirit generally goes before a fall. He says God may have to send a humbling visitation or permit a fall like Peter's dramatic denial just to check this potentially fatal pride.
So the counter strategy here is radical humility.
It is, but it's grounded in logic. They must constantly consider that they have nothing but what we have received, and that free grace alone is the differentiator. Being proud of grace is the most ready way to lose it, because God resisteth the proud. So Whitefield urges them to pray relentlessly, to be lowly in heart. He is teaching them that their spiritual high is not a sign of their own exceptionalism, but a gift to be held humbly.
We've moved from the gross temptations that attack the beginner to the subtler devices that target the person who's been on the path for a while, the more perfect men in Christ.
That's right. As the convert matures, the warfare moves inward, targeting patience and your internal state. And that brings us to device 3. Tempting to uneasiness or dryness in prayer.
This sounds a lot like spiritual burnout.
It often feels that way. Whitefield explains that the initial extraordinary illuminations of the new conversion are often replaced with a deadness and dryness in prayer. That ecstatic feeling fades, and it's replaced by a horrible deadness and dread. Satan uses this spiritual barrenness to vex the convert and tempt them to impatience, making them doubt the entire journey.
You mentioned immoderate love of sensible devotion. That's a very 18th century phrase. Can you clarify that for us?
Whitefield is warning against being addicted to the spiritual high, that peak sensory feeling of closeness to God. When the sensory feelings disappear, the follower feels abandoned. And he normalizes this experience by pointing out that even the spotless Lamb of God went through this Christ's bitter agony in the garden. These inward trials are necessary to wean us from the immoderate love of sensible devotion, preparing them for a deeper, less emotional relationship.
So you're saying he's preparing them for the slog.
Yeah.
The remedy isn't instant relief, but just sheer patience and persistence through that deadness.
Absolutely. The remedy is endurance. They must still persevere seeking Jesus, even if they are mourning all the day long. Whitefield offers this beautiful image. Christ, or the spouse, is with them, though behind the curtain. Just like Mary at the sepulchre or blind Bartimaeus crying out, they will eventually see Jesus again, but they must keep seeking through the darkness.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Device number 4. Troubling the individual with blasphemous, profane thoughts. This is deeply disturbing and seems designed for pure torment.
It is, and Whitefield claims this is one of Satan's most successful and tormenting devices. He compares the intrusive thoughts to an ague.
An ague, like a fever.
Yes, exactly. The term implies that these blasphemous thoughts return rhythmically and uncontrollably, like a fever breaking and returning, which just torments the victim. And people often wrongly impute these evil thoughts to mere physical disorder, but Whitefield says the devil uses them, the fiery darts. These suggestions arise particularly in the most solemn moments. Prayer, retirement, or even crowding around the holy table.
So the individual is forced to spend all their spiritual time driving out evil thoughts, as Abraham was, driving away the birds that came to devour his sacrifice. The danger is that they'll be terrified and driven away from using these ordinances altogether.
That is the ultimate goal of the device discouragement. The tormented soul reasons, I must be deeply wicked if I think these things during prayer, and then they retreat. But the defense Whitefield provides it's counterintuitive and profound.
What's the defense against suggestions that make your very heart tremble?
Do not be driven from the use of any ordinance. God knows it is not you, but Satan working. And Whitefield provides the ultimate reassurance. Those struggling with these tormenting thoughts are arguably more acceptable to God than those wrapped up by devotion who never wrestle, because they are suffering as well as doing.
So the ultimate explanation for the listener here is that wrestling with evil thoughts proves you're fighting. Pure, effortless devotion might just mean you aren't paying attention.
Precisely. They're likened to Nehemiah's servants holding a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other. They are building, yes, but they have to fight too. The fight is the service.
We move now to the external environment, device 5. Tempting by carnal friends and relatives. The most dangerous opposition often comes from the people who love you the most.
This strategy targets our fundamental human need for connection and approval. Satan uses powerful friends and dearest intimates to dissuade converts from the narrow way, often under the guise of concern or affection. And the source material gives clear, ancient examples. Eve tempting Adam, Job's wife telling him to curse God, and Peter persuading Christ to spare himself.
This applies perfectly to modern life. It's the family member who tells you your decision to change careers or pursue a more focused lifestyle is too extreme or not normal. It's that pressure to conform applied by those you cherish.
That's the modern application. Whitefield emphasizes this happens as much now as ever, even when there is no literal persecution. The pressure is social and familial, and the remedy Christ supplied must be used without apology. Get you behind me, because they favor the things of men, not the things of God. The follower must be prepared to forsake all to follow Christ, which often means choosing conviction over comfort.
That requires immense spiritual courage. So we have covered 5 intense and active strategies, from paralyzing guilt to intrusive thoughts and social pressure. What is the final, perhaps most insidious strategy?
Device number 6. Withdrawing himself, not tempting at all.
A calculated pause. This sounds like the calm before the storm.
It is. Satan leaves the individual only for a season. He might withdraw because God knows they're too weak to bear further attacks, or simply because the adversary is waiting for a more convenient season. He intends to return later like a roar and lion with double fury at an hour they think not of it.
So if the other devices were attacks, this one is an engineered lull designed to induce complacency. The moment you feel like you finally won, you drop your guard.
Exactly. Whitefield's delivering a stark warning about the danger of spiritual inertia. There is no such thing as peace in this life. We must always be upon our guard, watching and praying. If we cease to strive, we allow this spiritual Amalek to prevail. The doctrine states clearly, the warfare is accomplished by death. Only then is the combat finished.
So what does this entire tactical map mean for you, the listener, today? Whitefield was providing a complete roadmap for the psychological journey of faith. He acknowledges the path is difficult, beset with thorns, and that there are sons of Inch to be grappled with.
And those sons of Ench, or giants, they're the overwhelming obstacles. Yet the ultimate instruction is not to fear. You have to fight manfully under his banner, like David going forth against Goliath in the name and strength of the Lord of hosts. Though Whitefield affirms that the adversary's power is limited, a legion of devils could not destroy one man or even enter a swine without permission, the responsibility is on the individual to be strong and very courageous.
We've seen Whitefield systematically map out these 6 tactics in a clear, actionable way, pushing you toward despair or away into pride, inducing dryness in prayer, tormenting you with blasphemous thoughts, using carnal friends for social pressure, and finally, that calculated withdrawal to breed complacency. This 18th century analysis provided a clear classification system, shifting the follower's experience from confused suffering to strategic resistance.
And this leads to a final provocative thought that really encapsulates Whitefield's entire approach. He states that our glory does not consist in being exempted from temptation, but in enduring it. He taught his listeners to pray, not so much to be delivered from all temptation, but from the evil of it. The ultimate defense, he concluded, is putting on the whole armor of God, which includes the shield of faith and the sword of the Spirit, by looking always to Jesus, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. This framework shifts the goal from avoiding battle to preparing for constant war. So if you consider the pressures of the modern world, the constant temptation to check out, to despair over global problems, or to be defined by the expectations of your inner circle, how many of these ancient, subtle devices are still operating today, just using new digital and psychological levers? It's something to mull over until our next deep dive.
We will catch you next time for another deep dive.